Hey there, good afternoon, AP Gov students, or good morning, I suppose, or good middle of the night, whenever you happen to be watching this. I just wanted to take this opportunity to finish up our bureaucracy content. So, if you're following along on the outline, we spent Thursday and Friday talking about bureaucracy. I'm going to finish it up today, so that way tomorrow which is Tuesday, we will be ready for an executive branch plus bureaucracy activity, looking ahead to a test on both bureaucracy and executive branch, probably on Thursday. So that would be yeah, if you're listening to this or watching this on Monday, it would be this coming Thursday. So let's talk about attempts to shrink the federal government bureaucracy or control it. One of the things that I've been emphasizing throughout this chapter is the expansion of the federal government bureaucracy. That is a common trend in US history. That we talked about that in the federalism chapter. We've also talked about it again in this one, that the federal government is getting bigger, it's getting more involved in people's daily life. And so sometimes there are attempts to shrink or control or manage the federal bureaucracy. A lot of presidents, when they get elected, have a habit of coming in and saying they're going to get the federal government under control. They're going to shrink the size, make it more efficient, slim it down. All of that has to do with what we are about to talk about. So deregulation is a big way that this is accomplished. We talked about on Friday, we talked about bureaucratic agencies using regulations. Remember, they exercise their power of authoritative discretion, the power to make regulations that have the force of law. They exercise that power to make regulations, to make rules. Deregulation is undoing those rules, going in and saying, look, these rules are too unnecessary. They are burdensome. They're confusing. There's too many of them. So we're going to reduce the number of rules and free businesses up, free people's daily lives up from having to follow these burdensome regulations. So deregulation tends to be something more emphasized by Republicans, who tend to want, remember, a smaller federal government that just kind of gets out of people's way. But both parties do talk some about getting rid of burdensome regulations and deregulating. So anytime the executive branch is undoing rules previously put in place, that is deregulation, trying to have a smaller federal government that does less. Privatization is taking something that is public, something that is run by the government, and turning it over to private businesses. There has been talk of privatization in the past of some government provided services, things like Amtrak or the Postal Service. Both of those are currently federal government corporations. There has been some talk of, look, these government corporations cost money every year. They lose money, which means they have to be subsidized by the federal government. Perhaps a private business could run them more effectively or more efficiently. In the state of Virginia, we have ABC stores, alcoholic beverage control stores, that are the only places in the state where you can buy certain types of alcohol. They are owned and operated by the state. But there have been attempts, I believe there's a process underway right now. I'm not sure because I haven't been following this too closely, but I believe there are attempts underway to try to privatize those stores, turn control of them over to private companies. And so that way it's not the government running them, the state government. That would be an attempt to shrink the state government bureaucracy, is if we privatized them. The devolution revolution. Remember, we talked about devolution in our federalism chapter. Devolution is trying to reduce the power of the federal government and give power back to the states. One of the big ways that that is done is through the use of block grants. When the federal government is giving money to the states, they give them money with very few strings attached, very sort of vague guidance on how to use it, and they give states lots of control on how to run it. If you're giving states the power to oversee these programs. That means the federal government doesn't have to spend as much time and energy, and most importantly, money, overseeing these programs and accounting for how every dollar gets spent. It lets you, again, reduce the size, reduce the scope, reduce the budget of the federal government. So devolution, giving more power to the states instead of the federal government, would allow you to shrink the size of the federal bureaucracy. I've got oversight here bolded. We've used this term before. Congressional oversight is that term for Congress getting involved and watching over how an executive agency is managed, how it spends its time, how it spends its money. Often this involves hauling people from these agencies in front of congressional committees and forcing them to testify about their activities, forcing them to justify how they've been spending their time and money. A part of congressional oversight can also be Congress managing agency budgets. The power of the purse is the number one way that Congress controls the size and activities of the bureaucracy. So Congress exercising oversight, watching over an agency's activities. Remember, executive agencies, these bureaucrats, they have to answer to their director, they have to answer to the president, and they have to answer to Congress. Their loyalty is pulled in multiple different directions. I mentioned presidents already. Presidents get involved in the bureaucracy. They have their own agendas for what they want executive agencies to accomplish. So they may want to reduce the size of the federal bureaucracy, or they may have particular agenda items that involve giving the bureaucracy more power, having them increase regulations. So certainly a president's priorities are going to determine which parts of the federal bureaucracy kind of get a boost and get more emphasis, and which ones end up getting deregulated. And the last thing, this is a little bit different, but I think this is the best place that it fits. A whistleblower is a person, for our context, we're talking about government, of course. So for our context, a whistleblower is a person who works for the government, who publicly draws attention to wrongdoing by their bosses or by the agency that they work for. So there are protections in place. There is an actual protocol for people to follow. If they witness wrongdoing on the job, there's a way for them to document it. There's a path for them to take it to inspector generals within the bureaucracy, who can oversee and make sure that they can sort of investigate and see if this wrongdoing is accurate. So whistleblowers, if you work for the government and you are asked to do something that is against the law or something that is wrong, you can document that. You can go through this program. You can follow these protocols. You can turn your documentation over to your closest inspector general, and that person will follow up. And it's a way to try to keep government ethical. So whistleblowers are people who bring attention to wrongdoing by the government. You can also have a corporate whistleblower. That's obviously outside of government, but same term for someone who witnesses wrongdoing within their own country and draws attention, or not country, within their own company and draws attention to it. Okay. We've talked about the iron triangle before. If I were you, I would recommend just pausing this real quick and maybe sketching out. You don't have to get every word, but sort of sketching out or taking a screenshot of this graphic. There are three parts to this concept of the iron triangle. There are congressional committees. There are bureaucratic agencies. And then there are outside interest groups. So congressional committees, part of the legislative branch. Bureaucratic agencies are part of the executive branch. And then there are these outside interest groups that are not in government. And you can see from the graphic, they provide things to each other, and in return, they get help. So interest groups these outside groups are going to lobby to legislative committees to get favorable bills passed. Executive agencies provide their expertise, provide their testimony when laws are being written by the committees. In return, these congressional committees, if they have a good relationship with the executive agency, will give them more funding, give them more support. Interest groups, when they lobby, they also provide campaign contributions. In return, they expect friendly legislation. And you get a similar sort of relationship here between interest groups and the bureaucracy. They provide their information to the bureaucrats. They provide their support as long as they get favorable regulations. So these laws are created by committees. And then the rules are carried out by these bureaucrats, these unelected officials. So the Iron Triangle refers to the relationship, the legislative relationship between members of a congressional committee, people working for a bureaucratic agency, and interest groups. Each part of the Iron Triangle provides something for the other two parts and gets something in return. You can see a little bit of political favors changing hands from one to the other. One thing that we've seen a lot of in the past few years is people starting out in an interest group, being a lobbyist, and then eventually getting tapped for a job in the bureaucratic agency that used to regulate the industry that they lobbied for. Or we've seen members of Congress, former members of Congress, going to work for interest groups and becoming lobbyists. So a lot of the people who are in these Iron Triangle relationships, it's a pretty small group and they all kind of know each other. So this feels a little icky to a lot of Americans. It is the way that a lot of policy gets made, but it has that sort of gross, maybe not quite illegal, but maybe a little unethical feel to a lot of Americans. And then I want to emphasize just a few components of bureaucracy, as we have talked about most of these before, but I just want to put them all in one place. Remember, bureaucracy is complex. Think about all the something like 15 to 17 cabinet departments that all have various agencies and bureaus within them. The federal government is complex. There's no one expert. There's people who are highly specialized. That is the nature of bureaucracy. People are highly specialized in their area because bureaucrats tend to make their job their career. Over time, they develop expertise. So the things that characterize bureaucracy, they are complex. The people in them are highly specialized and they develop expertise at their job. People in the federal bureaucracy are hard to fire. Remember, at the top level, there's the political appointments, your cabinet officials who need Senate approval. But once you get down into the professionals, the people who are not political appointments, but who are professionals who are making this their career, they are hard to fire. They tend to stick around from one administration to another. They get their job based on merit because they are qualified for the job. They probably had to pass a civil service exam to work for the federal government. They had to prove that they had the proper education credentials. And then bureaucracy, while they are at work, they are independent. They are apolitical. Apolitical means they are not political. We talked about the Hatch Act, how you can't use your job to campaign. You are more than welcome to have political beliefs. You may be working for the president and hate that president. Maybe you voted for the other candidate, but you stick around at that job because you're passionate about your little specialized area of the federal bureaucracy and you are an expert on it. So you still want to see it done well. That tends to characterize the bureaucracy. They're going to carry out their job to the best of their abilities, regardless of who is president. A few other terms that we've talked about before, but I just wanted to put all in one place. Government appropriation, we've used that term before. Congress has to designate spending to finance programs. The Treasury may be full of money, but if Congress has not passed a budget, nothing can be spent. So appropriation, a huge part of appropriation is determining the budgets for all of these various bureaucratic agencies. Entitlement spending is money that the government has to pay directly to citizens who qualify. This type of spending can't just be cut. You'd have to change the actual law itself. You'd have to change the formulas that go into determining this type of spending. So it's very difficult to change that. It's also very politically unpopular to mess with entitlement spending. But the three big entitlement programs are Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. If you qualify for these programs, you are entitled to coverage by those programs. So entitlement spending goes directly to citizens as long as they qualify for it. And then the last thing I listed for you, some bureaucratic agencies to know. We covered most of these regulatory commissions, regulatory agencies in class, but I gave you some examples here, some examples of some government corporations and independent executive agencies, just to help you remember the difference between those three. And the last thing, this is just another graphic with the parts of the iron triangle, just to show it to you one more time in a slightly different way. This one's a little bit simpler than the other one I showed you. So you're looking at the three parts of the iron triangle, what each part gives to the others, and what they get in return. All right, so that is all for bureaucracy. Like I said, on Tuesday, we will do something in groups, a bureaucracy and executive branch related activity. And then we'll follow up. We'll do a little bit of review on Wednesday, and then we will do our test and FRQ for the executive and bureaucracy on Thursday. All right, that's the plan. I will see you all on Tuesday.